Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Historical Humans podcast. Today on episode 18, we are bringing it down south. We're taking it to the Republic of Texas, one of the only United States that served as its own independent nation prior to statehood. Some people in Texas argue that they could still be an independent country, but today we're going to go into why that wasn't a thing. Colum, do you just want to dive us right off now that we are aggravating all of our Texas listeners?
Yeah,
The
sure, of
entire
course.
state of Texas wants to have a word with us.
Sure, of course. But, before we get into Texas, I'd just like to say I'm Coleman. We are joined once again by our guest, Aaron Gilpin, and Justin Woods is, as always, starting us off. I've really wanted to do Texas for a long time. I spent a lot of my childhood in the city of Houston, so this is a very fun topic for me, something that was really bombarded at me growing up is the Republic of Texas. So to bring us in, the Republic of Texas begins with the Texas Revolution in October of 1835. Now, prior to the people of Texas starting this rebellion, Texas had been a part of the government of Mexico, and before that, the Spanish Empire. However, the Mexican government, very young, has only been around for about 15 years at this point. And in order to populate the territory of Texas, they opened it up to immigration from Texans.
Oh, no.
A large part of this is because under the Spanish Empire, Texas was this empty buffer state inhabited by understandably angry Native American tribes, particularly the Apache and Comanche tribes, who really just wanted everyone to stay out. And the Spanish Empire was more than happy to let them have that land and take the full force of anyone who attempted to invade from the north. Mexico, however, wants to urbanize, wants to modernize, wants big producing provinces. So they open the region to Texas settlers.
Which is where they made the biggest mistake of all. They actively encouraged Americans to come and settle in Texas, and just a hint of foreshadowing, this may play out in an important way.
Yeah.
Almost Mexican government really said, what could go wrong?
Yeah. Almost as soon as the immigrants start sweeping across the border, the Texas military becomes very concerned because by Mexican standards, these Americans wear their rights on their sleeve and are very much potentially going to demand more civil liberties than the Mexican government is willing to allow. And so the Mexican military is immediately suspicious of these Americans, and rightfully so. The Americans that inhabit Texas are very much wealthy frontiersmen at this point because they get a ton of land for coming across the border, and they use it for plantation economies, which makes you a ton of money if you have absolutely no morals.
Which, again, foreshadowing. That might become a very important piece later on. But it became this huge issue of contention because these Americans would come over. They're very prominent about their rights and about what they're able to do. Mexico was a lot more reserved about having people have these rights, but they still needed people to inhabit this. And these frontiersmen came into an area that had no prior infrastructure, was hostile with all the native inhabitants. It was a not so enticing prospect for a lot of Mexican civilians. Like, they really did not want to travel there, so they left it to those rambunctious old Americans.
Yeah, and 1828, just less than a decade after this policy is put in place, you do start to see the collapse of this Mexican government and of the Texans' willingness to participate in it. Because two things very important that happened in 1828. Number one, General Manuel Mier y Terán begins to reinforce the military garrisons in Texas because the Mexican government and the Mexican military views the Americans as the flashpoint of a revolution if there's going to be one.
Which is ironic you say that, yeah.
The Americans look at all the military building up in their their territory and see, hey, the government's getting ready to oppress us. They're going to try and take our civil liberties.
They really said, I remember my grandpappy talking about something like this.
Immediately, the Texas militias and the Mexican military just start staring each other down, just waiting for one to make the first move.
It's like that meme song on TikTok. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no.
Like a Lexington Concord situation. The revolutionaries are lined up right in front of the British soldiers, and they're like just waiting for the other to take the first shot.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing that really destabilizes this is Mexico has its first major election in 1828. It's only 4 years after Mexico sort of establishes its main constitution and solidifies its body of laws and governments and how to transition power. And that election does not go smoothly. There is a lot of disputes. There's a lot of discontent. There's a lot of ineffective rule by the government trying to make this transition in power happen. And so Texans kind of look at it and going, hey, there's this failing state trying to point guns at us. Maybe we shouldn't work with them. This, of course, gets way worse for them because, as we mentioned earlier, Texas is a plantation economy. All the Americans in Texas are plantation owners. They came over for the plantation land. And in 1829, this new government abolishes slavery.
Oh.
Yikes.
And the Texans riot.
Jeez, I could not imagine the Texans riot over slavery.
To the point that the law has to include a special provision saying Anglo-Americans are a privileged class and are exempt from the anti-slaveholding law.
Oh my God.
Which meant that their abolition of slavery was true for indigenous people, for Mexicans, for Spanish, for anyone other than an Anglo-American who had crossed the border as part of this immigrant program. You could not own slaves.
Jeez.
Unless you were white.
That is a interesting little provision, I think
it was
it
was the government's only way to stave off the revolution, which they do for about another 6 years.
Although I just had a realization that's kind of unfortunate is I don't think this podcast is going to be shown in Texas because we are currently teaching divisive history.
Oh, don't worry about
that.
There's
a lot of things not being taught in Texas.
Don't worry. That law only applies to public schools, and we are a private organization.
Oh, thank God. Okay.
Public education.
Yep.
Also, fun fact, if there's any non-American viewers, most of our U.S. textbooks are made in Texas. So even if you were born outside of Texas, we all have like some general knowledge of the Texas independence story, even though it's completely irrelevant to the other 49 states.
Which is ironic, too, because Texas wasn't the only state. That's why I was very specific about what I said in the beginning, is because the great island nation of Hawaii was its own nation prior to Americanisms, which that's something we could also do an episode about later down the line the American hijacking of Hawaii.
Yeah, stop visiting Hawaii for a vacation, please, for the love of God.
Listen. Here's the thing: you want to really piss off the Texans. Hawaii has a better claim to nationhood than Texas ever did because they had a centuries-long monarchy, and Texas had a decade-long republic.
Not to mention, Hawaii still had their governor's palace is a palace.
I see no lies.
All right. So back to the timeline. So following the abolition of slavery debacle, Mexico realizes these American Texans are clearly too powerful, they're too rowdy, so they try and stem the tide by passing the Law of 1830, which the Texans view as hugely discriminatory. It says that no more Anglo-Americans will be allowed to immigrate and settle in Texas. They're canceling their immigration program. A horrible, horrible thing that no government would ever ban, someone from coming into their territory and settling it. No government has ever done that. It's so un-American that these Texans flip out, even though their government is currently doing it to the Chinese.
But they never stopped immigrating. The Americans continued to immigrate illegally into Mexico.
Americans illegally going to Mexico.
Yeah.
How
The irony
how the
is
narrative
so
has
beautiful.
changed.
Yeah.
The irony is so thick you could cut
Especially
it with
in
a butter
Texas.
knife.
Yeah. And the big reason for this is the Texas economy is producing 315,000 US dollars in cotton every year by the eve of the revolution. Now this is 1834 dollars. Okay, this is a period of time when like a nickel can buy you a full meal.
Yeah, it's also a time when like $5 can get you halfway across the country
Yeah.
on a train.
Mm-hmm.
I really wish, guys. I really wish.
So this is a ton of money. There was no real translation one-to-one from that time to now because it is so long ago. But this is hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money, probably several billion.
So I was curious and I looked it up. And you're right, there's no stable figure, but the rough estimate is that $1 US is equivalent to about $3,445 in today's currency. But when you extrapolate that ends up being $1,085,000,000. $1,085,000,000.
So there's $1 billion industry. All you have to do is cross a border illegally and sell your morals.
Gee. So
That's
you're
right
saying that if you illegally immigrate for financial reasons, it's okay, but if you illegally immigrate...
I did not say that. Don't put words in my mouth.
No,
Well,
I'm
the
not saying you did. I'm
grandpappies of
talking
Texas
proverbially,
sure
yeah,
thought
the
it was
Texas.
fine.
But then if you illegally immigrate for a safer passage or safer home, it is problematic.
Yeah, because it's America. As long as you do it for money, it's fine.
Okay. That makes so much sense. You're good. Okay, let's continue. Money
So
makes
now
everything good.
We're going to jump ahead to 1834. This is the eve of revolution, April 1834. The man by the name of General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna seizes supreme power in Mexico City and dismantles the Mexican federal government.
Santa Anna's an interesting one. He shows up quite a bit in American history as well.
Yeah, two of his biggest, two of his first acts, aside from brutally putting down a rebellion against him in southern central Mexico, is he limits the state militia to one armed person per 500 individuals, which basically equates to taking away most of Texas guns. They were not happy about that. And he dismantled the state government of Texas. So the people of Texas had no government and no authority but him.
Can I input one of my favorite facts that ties back to all of us?
Mm-hmm.
Is that General Santa Anna had a fake leg due to a battle with the French, where he was hit by cannonball. Well, he had a fake leg. He was an amputee and had a prosthetic. Well, during the battle in 1847, a regiment from Illinois stole his fake leg.
Did we keep the leg?
We did. It's in Springfield.
Yep.
We
Yes.
kept a person's leg?
A false leg.
You stole the limb off a defeated general, but that is many years ahead of us.
That's a hell of a
Hey.
war trophy.
If you guys want, the three of us will meet up and we will go on a road trip down to Springfield to see Santa Anna's prosthetic leg.
Yeah, screw saying Lincoln's grave. I want to see the leg.
Yes.
Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see a dead man's leg.
Yes.
So this dismantling effectively, what it meant was that the people of Texas didn't really recognize their own state government as their state government. Because what had happened was the city of Monclova had been declared the capital of Texas in 1833. However, the city of Saltillo was the first to declare support for Santa Anna.
Ooh.
So Santa Anna canned everyone in Monclova and appointed his own government in Saltillo, which the Texans viewed as illegitimate on account of it, not being elected.
For having a bunch of illegal immigrants, Texas really did voice their opinions on a lot of these political matters quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, were they given citizenship anyway?
The ones who immigrated legally during the program were given Mexican citizenship and land in exchange for, building in Texas, surrounded by all these very increasingly angry Native American tribes who didn't like that there was anyone there to begin with.
Again,
True.
fair. But
Yeah,
then, like everyone else who still continued, they obviously didn't have citizenship.
Yeah,
but still made their voices known.
Yeah, they made their voices known, and it's not too long before the first time Texas militias and Mexican troops clash. We come right up. Yeah, we come to the Anahuac incident. This is where Santa Anna had decided that the Texas Customs Office needed to be reinforced. He needed more taxes out of Texas. They weren't being collected properly. And in response to hearing that the military was coming to help the tax man, a relatively unknown man named William Travis started an insurrection against the soldiers.
Oh no. Texans and insurrections. Oof.
The Mexican troops withdrew without a fight when they saw the armed mob approach them. And the general in charge of Texas, a man named DeCoste, demanded Travis's arrest as it was an act of piracy against the customs office. The colonists refused to acknowledge that Travis had done anything wrong and did not hand him over.
I mean, they did. What else were they really expecting?
Yeah, this leaves the Mexican government in a very strange position. You're a military dictator, and people aren't listening to you. What do you think is going to happen when they make you look weak?
They're going to flex their arms. They're going to use their military might, and they're going to try and suppress.
Wrong. They're going to defund Texas.
Oh, they went the bureaucratic route.
Yep.
I guess.
Yeah. The next move is called the Gonzales incident. The Mexican government had loaned several cannons out to various settlers, including the DeWitt colonists, to help them defend their new, Mexican settlements against Native Americans. The Mexican government recalled said equipment. A man named General Ugartechea sends 5 men to take the cannon from the DeWitt colonists. The colonists refuse to surrender, and both the colonists and the Mexicans call for reinforcements. The result is you have 2 standing armies just sitting outside this town. As hundreds of people respond. And on October 2nd, fighting breaks out over the cannon, and the Mexicans are forced to retreat under a hail of bullets. The Texas Revolution has officially begun with a military victory for the Texas rebels.
All over a cannon being recalled.
Yep. Over the next few months, from October through December of 1835, The Texans rout the Mexican military time and again. They defeat them easily at Anahuac, Nacogdoches, Goliad, Gonzales, and San Antonio. They beat the Mexican government so handedly that they don't even form a proper army to face the retaliation of 1836. They think they've won. They think the Mexican army cannot stand and fight. So they don't even make an army. They just sit back and say, "Hey, we freed Texas."
Oh.
If it would be that easy.
They just said, "All right, guys, we did it. Let's go home."
All right, time to wrap up. Let's call it a day.
Yep. They elect a man named Sam Houston as the commander-in-chief of the Texan military and give him absolutely no authority to coordinate or deploy said military.
What?
That name doesn't sound familiar at all. No. I don't think I've ever heard the name Sam Houston.
They were literally just mimicking the United States. It's like, oh, the supreme commander of the military is called the commander-in-chief. Yeah, we'll apply that title to some man. Here you go. Here's a piece of paper that says you're in charge.
So who was in charge of the military? Was there even really a military?
No.
Nope. It was just armed band. It was armed bands of militia answering to whoever they were loyal to or whoever the state government put in charge of them, on account of the fact that that was a democratic government. So I guess we have to listen to them.
God damn it.
Yep.
Oh boy.
Yep. So 1836 comes around, and you can imagine how poorly this goes with for Texas. Santa Anna himself comes across the border to deal with this revolution.
Damn, they called in the big guns. He said, "I gotta take care of this myself."
Yep. he pulled a Thanos. He's like, "Fine, I'll do it myself."
And for the first 3 months of 1836, Santa Anna and the Mexican military annihilate Texan forces. They meet them in battle on February 27th at San Patricio, March 2nd at Agua Dulce Creek, March 6th at the Alamo, March 16th at the Battle of Refugio, and March 20th at the Battle of Colito. And time and again, the Texas troops are either annihilated or forced into a heavily harassed retreat.
So for
Santa Anna wasn't playing.
Our non-American viewers too, the Alamo is probably the most prominent of those battles because it was a famous last stand.
Yeah, there's an entire section in our notes just dedicated to this last stand at the Alamo because it kind of sets the stage for the undoing of this Mexican blitzkrieg.
Oh,
yeah.
geez.
Also, it helps that David Crockett was there too.
I mean, a bunch of American citizens being slaughtered at the hand of the Mexican government. I can't possibly see how any sort of intervention or oversight might come in.
Oh, speaking of slaughtered.
Oh no.
The Mexican military offensive culminates in what is known as the Goliad Massacre. This massacre occurs as the result of the Battle of Colito, where Colonel James Fannin of the Texas Revolutionaries surrendered to General Urrea. He and 400 of his men are taken as prisoners of war, and they were sent to the town of Goliad. There, Santa Anna orders them executed to a man, and 400 people are executed on March 27th, 1836.
Also, casually committing war crimes, I see.
Yeah. Unarmed prisoners of war.
Wow.
And the Alamo really galvanizes what remains of the Texas Army, which, to be fair, the main army under Sam Houston has not fully engaged the Mexican forces. They've been taking out various garrisons and smaller, uncoordinated Texas armies. Granted, these armies are of several thousand people, but there's no overall strategy. So they're encircled, they're isolated, they don't know where to go. And that brings us to San Jacinto, which is where Sam Houston, who is currently fleeing from a military position at Gonzales to a place called Lynch's Ferry on the San Jacinto River. And Santa Anna is personally hunting him down.
Damn, this man had a vengeance.
I mean, this is basically a bunch of Americans that they originally let come over, and then they became defiant, stopped letting Americans coming over, and spat in the face essentially of Santa Anna and his reign.
Yep.
These were nobodies compared to him.
Yep.
He was about to make an example.
Yeah. Now Santa Anna at this riverhead has Houston outnumbered by about 4-3.
Wow.
So it's a small numerical superiority, but he's got Houston on the ropes. The Texans have never managed to perform anything more than a delaying action against him. He's very confident and he's very angry.
Not to mention the Mexican troops are like actual soldiers. They're actual trained, whereas the Texan forces are primarily just a militia.
Yeah. And at this point at the river, Houston realizes that running is effectively suicide. His army will disband. He'll eventually get run down by the coordinated Mexican military. So he makes an about face, and on April 21st, he attacks Santa Anna while his troops are taking a siesta. And Santa Anna's camp is completely surprised by the Texan attack. Of the 1,200 Mexicans stationed at the camp, 630 are killed, 730 are captured, including Santa Anna, and only 9 Texans are struck down in the fighting. It's just a torrent and a flood.
That's a massacre. So they killed over half the Mexican soldiers.
It is a single most decisive battle of the revolution, and it ends the revolution.
I just want to know, at what point did they think, guys, we should definitely take a siesta? I know, like, culturally, like, siesta is like a big thing. It's a big thing in Spain too, still, and Italy has a similar concept. But like, you're at war, and unless you like, I feel like, you know, a siesta isn't that important. But again, I can't say for sure.
What the flaw is there's an assumption that the traditions are going to be respected.
True.
On both sides. This is something similar happens in the American Revolution. George Washington crosses the Delaware on Christmas Day and attacks a force of Hessian mercenaries employed by the British on Christmas. And there was an assumption by the Hessians that everyone was just going to celebrate Christmas and not fight each other, which proves horribly wrong.
I mean, yeah, I guess. Also, with Santa Anna having the superior force, ideally, the superior numbers and superior forces, and also having not lost to the Texans once up till then.
Yeah, he's been at war for 4 months. He's fought 5 major battles. He's lost none.
And not to mention that he suffered the defeat. He was captured, but it was at this point in this battle that a garrison of troops from Illinois, or wait, no, it was later on in the war.
No, this is the first war.
Okay, so the second war is where they stole the land.
There's a second war, yeah.
Okay.
Spoiler alert, there's 2 wars. So with this capture, he is forced to sign the Treaties of Velasco on May 14th. There's a public treaty that acknowledges the sovereignty of Texas, and ends the war. Then there's a secret treaty where Santa Anna pledges that the Mexican government must adhere to this treaty at all costs. However, although the public treaty is generally accepted by Mexico, Santa Anna is deposed in captivity because his claim to power is he's a military strongman.
Yeah.
He's just spent over a month as a hostage of a rebel force. His government can't sustain itself without him.
That's unfortunate.
However, the Republic of Texas is established by this treaty as much as the Mexican government really doesn't recognize it.
Yay.
It's an end to hostilities. Like, this was Santa Anna's war, and it's time to just stop.
That was it. That wasn't us. We didn't want this. He wanted it.
Yeah.
So we're cool, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And all right, since you were all so excited, I'll let one of you take over for the section on the Alamo, because it is such an important battle culturally for the United States.
Or at least just Texas.
Texas thinks it is the United States.
Well,
I mean, yeah.
everything
kinda.
is bigger in Texas, including the egos.
And the cowboy hats.
Yes. But the Alamo was where Santa Anna marched across the Rio Grande to San Antonio in early 1836. And the Alamo was a fortress outside of San Antonio. And it was one of two cities defending the only roads between Texas and Mexico. The other Texas was Gilead. And Gilead was more military-oriented and was more of a target. Because the reason for that is because it held the majority of the Texan military. And San Antonio was the site of a humiliating defeat in 1835.
Yes, San Antonio was the military headquarters for Mexico in Texas. So the fact that it had been overrun by these rebels was considered a public humiliation for Santa Anna's government. They hated that they had lost San Antonio. Even though Gilead is the more military objective, it's where the revolutionaries set up their main camp.
Yeah, but you got to talk about the insult and
yeah,
the whole thing's definitely goes after Santa Anna's ego. I mean, it really does. It's humiliating in so many different regards. So this is definitely a war of spite and a war of just, I don't know. Would you say morals at this point of keeping to the lay of the law?
Well, to be fair, Santa Anna represents an upheaval of the law as he overthrows the previous government in 1834. And this war is a direct result of him attempting to oppose a military dictatorship on some very republic-minded Texans. It's democracy or nothing with these people. And Santa Anna is an authoritarian leader.
Yeah.
The two don't mix.
Also the part where the Mexican government said you can't own slaves.
Yeah, that seems to be a contentious issue in Texas, even to this day.
Yeah, although they did grant the Texans an exemption to that law, the Texans still viewed the existence of said law as an insult.
I mean, to be fair, they made the exception later, but it was. I mean,
the exception occurred within the same year. There's a lot of there's time for debate because the government that passes that law is a democracy. The Texans hear about it, become angry, get their exemption into the law.
Not to mention, I think it's important to highlight this was in the 1830s, where you couldn't just send a text message, you couldn't check Twitter and see, oh, hey, the government just passed what? It was no, the government passed it. It was printed out. It was then circulated amongst mail routes. I would say at the earliest it would take weeks to get there, if not a few months.
Yeah. Essentially, news of the coming law reached Texas. Texas became angry. News of the Texans' anger reached the government. The government put an exemption into the law to keep the Texans in line.
I mean, just imagine if if any slave found out, right? They found out oh, we're free. And then the landowners were trying to hold them back, and then they oh yeah, no, wait, we're exempt from this. So get back to the field.
Aaron,
in fact, that happened in Texas after the American Revolution.
What?
Yeah, following the reading of the Emancipation Proclamation in Houston, or in Texas, I don't think it was actually Houston itself.
Wait, did you say revolution or Civil War?
He said revolution, but it's the Civil War.
Just making sure. I was wait a minute.
I'm speaking about 4 different wars at this point.
Sorry.
The slave owners executed any slave that heard about this and forced the slaves to work one more season so they could cash out and make profit.
Which, by the way, this is the origins of the latest federal holiday, Juneteenth, which we actually coincidentally did a podcast on this topic and went into great detail. Shameless plug, but check out our other podcast because we do talk about this in detail. But yes, they did that. And again, it took place in Texas. So there was definitely this aura of suppression of information. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, and back on track here for the Alamo.
See, Texas is holding up to its roots of suppressing information.
Yes.
Obviously, yes. And Texas is also holding to its roots of poor leadership because at the Alamo, immediately, there is a dispute over who leads.
Oh, geez.
Because the Alamo is defended by 150 men and 20 cannons. And there is James Bowie, who was appointed by Sam Houston, the commander of all Texan forces. And there is William Travis, who was appointed by Henry Smith, the governor of the Republic of Texas. They are both appointed to lead the defense of the Alamo. Which one of them has actual authority?
So they come together and they agree on a coalition and everyone gets along and they share leadership.
Actually, yes, they do.
Wait,
both
what?
agree to yes. Bowie and Travis actually like each other and decide that the best way to coordinate the defense is to divide the leadership between the two of them and work together, effectively having a commanding officer at multiple posts along the defense of the fortress to increase morale and make snap decisions about the defense actually increases the cohesion of the Texan army and not
that's
destroy it.
Incredible.
They actually got along.
That is incredible.
Hey, if it works, it works.
Yeah. Well, it clearly... Well, did it work?
I mean, it worked in the moment.
Yeah. They do get some reinforcements to their 150-man garrison. 12 men under the command of Davy Crockett of Tennessee crossed the border from the United States to stand with Travis and Bowie.
So they went from 150 to 162.
Yeah.
Great.
And
but
30
wait,
more
there's
men
more.
are dispatched from the Texas militia garrisons to reinforce the Alamo. So they come to about 183 to 189. Sources dispute how many were there. A fun fact for Davy Crockett coming over is Crockett came over because he had served with I think it is Travis or Bowie. He had served with one of them during the War of 1812. And so effectively his old war buddies were holed up in a fort calling for help. And he said, "Hey pal, I'm coming."
Well, the funny thing is, where I grew up was not too far from where Davy Crockett is from. So it's just kind of an interesting little connection there. But yeah, the other thing that I think is important to highlight is the fact that these troops were basically volunteers just seeking gold and glory. They're like, we're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to march off into war. This never ends poorly for anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, they picked a bad time for that.
Yeah. So Santa Anna arrives at the Alamo on February 23rd with a force numbering in the thousands against less than 200 defenders.
Wow.
And he decides that he's going to lay siege to the Alamo and bomb it out of existence as punishment for what these Texas rebels have done. It takes him 13 days to breach the walls.
So this is where Grant got his idea for Vicksburg.
Effectively.
Yeah.
And the Alamo in those 13 days really does achieve a great deal of glory because the Alamo's whole purpose is to hold out long enough for Sam Houston to rein in the remaining militias and gather a proper freaking army to defend Texas, the rest of Texas with. And they hold Santa Anna at the Alamo for 13 days, which gives him the time to gather his forces that would later meet Santa Anna at San Jacinto and crush him.
So they did, in fact, do their job.
There's a reason why Marty Robbins calls it the 13 Days of Glory.
Until it kills all of the defenders.
That's why it's the 13 Days of Glory, because they die to a man defending an untenable position.
Yeah, well, and
Amazing they held up for that 13 days.
A few people did leave, like women, children, and slaves, but pretty much anyone who defended it, you got a nice wooden box as your reward.
Yeah, when Santa Anna breaches the walls, his orders are to kill every living soul inside the Alamo, and a handful of people are spared either because they flee the walls prior to the final breaching, or because they're effectively children and Santa Anna's troops are unwilling to put 10-year-olds to the sword.
Now, if only Russia was like that.
Stop getting a
And now we're banned in Russia.
Special military operation.
And so, as of 1836, after all these bloody battles, the Republic of Texas is formed, and it will last for 9 years.
Longer than anyone else probably expected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the Alamo.
Oh.
Yeah. They form at San Felipe de Austin on November 7th, 1835. And they adopt the 1824 Mexican Constitution as theirs. This is the Constitution that Santa Anna had overthrown. They appoint all the governing officials for Texas in that time, but they do not officially declare independence until March 2nd, 1836, during a meeting at Washington on the Brazos, where they enact their full declaration that they had written out in the intervening time period. However, the Republic of Texas doesn't really officially begin until the Treaty of Velasco recognizes it as a nation on May 14th. Again, 1836. And
Texas, this isn't like the Texas that we think of today. Like this is Texas that like so has bigger territory that like goes like all the way up to like Colorado, like this weird stretch up there, and expands a lot farther.
They controlled almost all of New Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and Wyoming. And then there's a very fun merry-go-round that starts to happen. I don't know if either of you would like to jump in on the 10 capitals of the Republic of Texas.
Let's see, we got Velasco, Washington on the Brazos, Harrisburg, Galveston, and Columbia.
Yep.
And then apparently Sam Houston decided to move the capital again, finally, to Austin in 1839 when he's president of Texas.
Yeah. But first he moves it into the city of Houston because goddamn, you got to have your own ego.
Yes, I was gonna say don't skip out on the city named after him.
Yeah. He moves it to Houston. However, by 39, Austin has been built enough to the point that it is a fully functioning city, and Austin was effectively built to be the capital of Houston because they build Austin at the around the site where Santa Anna is defeated at San Jacinto.
So they really just wanted to give it to Santa Anna. They really say, hey, you see this new shiny capital we built? It's where we kicked your ass.
They wanted to rub it in. The center of our government is the site of your single greatest military defeat.
Another reason to respect Austin, Texas.
But the important thing, too, is the way in which you gain independence and you get recognition as a country is just that, recognition. And after they declared their freedom or their independence, they were recognized by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the Netherlands, and an interesting one, the Republic of the Yucatan.
Yep.
Which eventually ended up getting incorporated into Mexico. So kind of interesting there that another republic.
Yeah, the Republic of Yucatan had a bit of a dislike with Mexico during this time period. They had the same problem with Santa Ana that Texas did, except the Republic of Yucatan is technically separate, whereas the Republic of Texas was technically a part of Mexico.
I see a running theme with Mexico in this time period.
Yeah. So the Republic of Texas had exactly 2 presidents over the course of 3 terms. They had Sam Houston at their start and at their end, and a man named Mirabeau Lamar sticking in for the middle term.
It's interesting to me because each person represents a different political party within the nation of Texas, which you had the nationalist faction, which was led by Mirabeau Lamar, that advocated the expulsion of the indigenous. They actually were a proprietor of Manifest Destiny to the Pacific Ocean, and they also wanted continued independence for Texas, whereas good old boy Sam Houston was led the opposing faction, and they supported peaceful coexistence with the natives, but more importantly, they advocated for incorporation into the United States. And the timeline of their presidencies really indicate how Texas was doing at that time period, which obviously culminated in their annexation to the U.S.
Yes, Houston is the first and last president of Texas, whereas Mirabeau Lamar is the second president of Texas.
Yeah, because Sam Houston got elected a third time, or for a second time. So he's the first and the third.
They essentially, the Republic of Texas essentially flip-flopped on its policies for its brief point of existence.
We're not going to Grover Cleveland this with Houston, okay?
Yeah.
We don't like Grover Cleveland.
I should also point out here, as the bottomless barrel of facts, Sam Houston's political party was not known as the opposing faction. That is a name given to it by later scholars. It does not appear, at least in the research I was able to conduct, to have had a name or been organized at that point. It was just the party that was against the nationalist faction.
So now,
you don't give yourself a name, someone's going to give you one.
Then there's no better name than the opposing faction. Well, what were they known for? They just kind of opposed.
They didn't like the other guy.
Yeah.
But this all ended up with the incorporation into the United States, which took place in 1845. On February 28th, the United States Congress passed the Annexation Resolution, which was a bill allowing for the annexation of Texas.
Yep. On the 1st of March, U.S. President Zachary Taylor signed the resolution, and the date for this resolution to come into effect was set for December 29th of 1845. And one of the interesting things about this is the Republic of Texas, on October 13th, approved a state constitution that was then accepted by Congress, and this allowed Texas to become a state immediately upon its annexation into the United States.
But wait, there's usually a process.
Yeah, there is usually a phase known as the territorial phase in the process of becoming a state. This is a phase during which you are assessed for a set amount of population per square mile, and a set and essentially your constitution is written and reviewed by Congress as acceptable and not in violation of the Constitution of the United States. Texas got to skip that because they effectively went ahead and did everything prior to the U.S. laying claim to their lands. Usually the U.S. says, this is my land now, and then you have to scramble to get everything put together.
Geez, what else did they skip out on?
This land was your land. This land is my land.
This land is not yours. Now you must leave.
Oh, yeah.
And so you might be wondering, Texas, less than a decade ago, fought a major war to be free. Why might they accept incorporation into another government? I mean, besides the fact that Sam Houston seems to like it.
Were they broke?
They were beyond broke.
I mean, there's not. I mean, despite the fact that Texas did have a big cotton producing industry, there's not a lot of place for that cotton to go.
Yeah.
Since the South already at this point had pretty much a commercial monopoly on the rest of the United States and most of Europe.
Yeah. Additionally, anything that wasn't raw cotton had to be imported to Texas. So there's a massive trade deficit for the Republic. And in exchange for the U.S. taking on Texas's debt, the U.S. got to incorporate Texas into its territory and divide said territory as it saw fit.
But one of the reasons they did that, which is kind of a key note to point out, is that the reason they gave up this territory and that they actually gave like the panhandle to Oklahoma was that slavery was illegal above that specific parallel. So they ceded the land in order to maintain slavery upon incorporation into the U.S.
Yeah.
It really seems like Texas was hell-bent on keeping slavery. I'm sure this won't come to a head much later in time.
It was their entire economy, for better or worse. Mostly
worse. How that could sour.
Mostly worse.
Just kick that can down the road, I guess.
Your entire economy is morally bankrupt and you're still losing money.
So
time to find a different economy.
So since Texas was incorporated as a slave state, is that what state ended up becoming also a state as a free state? Is that how Maine happened?
That might
I think that was Missouri.
Happened. Or it could be how Missouri.
No, Missouri was a slave state.
Yeah, Missouri was slave.
Because I remember what is Maine now because used to be part of Massachusetts.
The parallel is a law that's put into effect for future states. However, Missouri was already a slave state. Virginia is above the parallel, and it's already a slave state.
Yeah, but that was one of their like past. That was one of the pre-abolition concessions that they had, was that slavery was allowed above a specific line, and that any new state. So I think it might have been maybe a state north of it, like Kansas.
Maybe.
But it also may not have a specific comparison either.
Well, no, wait.
I do not believe Kansas is a state at the time of the Civil War. Because it's called Bloody Kansas because it's a territory and thus can't declare for either side.
Because there was a whole issue of them trying to figure out whether they wanted to be a slave state or a free state. And John Brown decided to have a word.
Yeah. But moving along here, this incorporation is not entirely popular with everybody, specifically Mexico. And so begins the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848.
And this is like a good old American fashion. We sent troops into the disputed territory, which then was sparked a retaliation by the Mexican troops.
Yeah.
And then we used as propaganda to say that they spilled American blood on American soil.
Yeah. You can go, Justin, sure.
Sorry, I just want to point out a real quick thing. And this was something I highlighted in the Rio Grande Historical Humans Explains videos, is that the border with Texas was very contentious with Mexico because there were three main misunderstandings. Primarily, the U.S. saw it to the Rio Grande, which the Mexicans didn't refer to it as Rio Grande. Secondly, there are numerous different rivers nearby that are referred to locally as the Rio Grande. And Mexico had a different opinion for what the border was.
Yeah. And initially as of 1846, Mexico only recognized Texas as owning land as far south as the Nueces River and not the Rio Grande, whereas Texas declared itself all the way to the Rio Grande. And so when the U.S. bought Texas, the U.S. felt that it had bought all the way to the Rio Grande. And Mexico did not. So the U.S. posted an army in the disputed territory to, just ensure everything's peaceful here until we can work this dispute out, and definitely not force a claim by squatters' rights.
Good old American.
To force a claim by squatters' rights.
I mean, it's worked before.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happened with a few islands in Washington.
Yeah. initially, the U.S. tries to very quietly smooth things over with Mexico City. They send a diplomat by the name of John Siddell to meet with the president of Mexico, who unilaterally refuses to see him. The United States does not take this slight sitting down. And instead, this is when Zachary Taylor is dispatched. He dispatches the troops to.
Polk sent Taylor to the disputed territories.
Yeah. Yes, I believe that's how it happened.
They're both U.S. presidents at some point, but Polk was president at this point, and Taylor was a general. So Polk sent Taylor to the disputed territory, and that was basically the United States saying, okay, you're going to snub our diplomats? We're just going to occupy this contested territory.
Yeah.
Come take it.
Yeah. And Polk began to immediately draft a statement to Congress saying that we had to go to war, the U.S. had to go to war with Mexico, because Mexico is refusing to acknowledge U.S. land claims and has disgraced our nation by refusing to accept the demands of our negotiators.
Ooh, so this is the first of our really stringent cause for wars, huh?
He never delivers that speech because on April 25th, Mexican troops attack what they view as U.S. soldiers occupying Mexican territory and drive them back. 16 soldiers for the United States are killed. Polk immediately throws out his previous declaration of war and goes to Congress claiming that Mexican troops have invaded American soil and killed American troops on American soil in an all-out invasion set to destroy democracy and wipe the nation from the earth.
Wow, where have I heard this before?
Slightly better reasoning, but also completely irrational.
He goes all in on the alarmist. The propaganda spreads immediately of shed blood, American blood on American soil, and it's an attack. They invoke the War of 1812, where the British invaded from the north and defeated several U.S. armies on American soil. It's a full-on panic. It's been less than 50 years since the U.S. has suffered a defeat on its soil, and they are just a tinderbox.
Well, and this really had people divided too, because you had people that supported it, but then like the strong Southern Democrats, who are the conservatives, they really supported it. But the Whigs, who were pretty much an anti-Jackson party, saw it as a conscienceless land grab by Polk. Like just an excuse for a cause.
I think my favorite little tidbit out of this is an attempt to divide Mexico. The U.S. restored Santa Ana in an attempt to divide Mexico's forces, and instead he decides to lead the Mexican army
because Santa Ana is still out for blood against the people of Texas.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know who thought that was a good idea. I'm pretty sure it might have been Polk.
Yeah. And
Whoever thought that, what's a good idea? Let's get the man who hates Texas and the land that we just took. Let's put him back in Mexico. Let's see what happens, guys.
Yeah. Speaking of divided, President Polk, in response to the criticism he receives from the Whigs for the morality and legality of this invasion, takes the calm, rational decision of immediately declaring all the Whigs traitors to the United States of America.
Damn, where have I heard this before?
For their vocal dissent towards his war efforts.
Which then the Whigs decide to vote to censor Polk for unnecessarily and unconstitutionally declaring war in Mexico.
Yeah.
And they got him kicked off Twitter.
Yeah.
Wait, no.
The very next year after the war is declared and Polk declares all Whigs traitors, the Whigs win the majority of Congress and censor Polk for unlawfully declaring war.
Oh God, nothing's changed.
Wow.
Nothing's changed in 150 years.
I feel a little bit better now.
Yeah.
This is just normal.
This leads to a young political figure by the name of Abraham Lincoln, introducing 8 spot resolutions to Congress that are effectively a dismantling of all the reasons Polk claimed the U.S. had to go to war with Mexico.
Wow. So he's
Absolutely nothing comes of it, other than it technically proves that Zachary Taylor was standing on Mexican soil when Mexican troops attacked him.
Damn.
The war doesn't stop. It changes nothing, but it just proves that Mexico was justified in a military response.
But see, my favorite
Lincoln said, the moral high ground's mine.
The best part about this, though, is not just that it was this illegal land grab, but it's what happened immediately after. You know, when Colonel Stephen Kearny was sent to occupy New Mexico and California, and just these parts that aren't even related to this conflict, like, they're just west.
Yeah, it's just, California is technically still a part of Mexico at this point, and the Californians, like, no one even opposed them. They're just like, hey, you're in charge. Yeah, what? All right, let's just cross off. So they got, like, Spanish crossed off, Mexican crossed off. We are now American. Got it. All right, everyone. The sign says American. We'll see what happens in 2 years.
The guy just went west, so it's like, yeah, that seems about right.
Yeah.
Oh, who put this ocean here?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, it's ours now.
Yep. Meanwhile, Taylor goes down south of the Rio Grande, and he does very well for himself. He captures the city of Monterey. He wins the Battle of Buena Vista in 1847, which is a major Mexican defeat. Like, the main Mexican army is retreating before him. But Taylor, as much as he wants Texas in the United States, doesn't really have that drive for manifest destiny, Anglo-American expansionism.
I mean, he pretty much had the disputed territory, and he captured the capital of the country. I mean, he really didn't have a reason to go further.
Yeah,
it's interesting that he showed that restraint,
because he refuses to run down the troops after the Battle of Buena Vista, and Polk basically accuses him of cowardice for refusing to run down retreating soldiers after you've already secured all your main military objectives.
Wow, he really wanted to encourage these war crimes.
The result of this is that Polk orders a naval invasion of Mexico. He dispatches a man named General Winfield Scott to seize Veracruz by sea and then sack Mexico City.
Oh, I guess Taylor didn't take the capital.
He did not take the capital. However, he had secured the U.S. position beyond the Rio Grande, which is all you really needed to win this war.
Pretty much, yeah. But then they took the capital.
Yeah. So Scott takes Veracruz after a 3-week siege, and just like everything else in this war, it is undisputed victories for the United States of America. No force is able to successfully challenge Scott, and by September of 1847, he has seized Mexico City, and all military resistance to U.S. Forces just evaporates. The government is fallen.
It's also kind of surprising to me is that even with this conflict, the majority of the casualties were not because of death due to combat. Only about 1,500 soldiers died because of combat, but over 10,000 died to illness. So, poor hygiene practices, disease runs rampant in these military camps, and really just...
The military forces were alternating between harsh deserts and very wet, more or less tropical places where disease-carrying bacteria and mosquitoes are very common. So you were either dying of dehydration or you were dying from mosquitoes. You were not dying from bullets in this war. At least if you were an American, you were not.
Yeah, if you were Mexican, it might have been a different story.
Yeah.
That's not. That's like not even including.
Yeah.
what the U.S. got out. Like, what the U.S. got out of it, was what we now call New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, California, Texas, and Western Colorado. But the U.S. also paid Mexico like $15 million for it too. So
yeah.
But see, that was a huge land grab.
That was a compensation.
Manifest destiny achieved, guys. We can go home. Oh wait,
we are.
This is home.
The treaty that establishes this is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
Hidalgo.
And, the only reason the Mexican-American War persists till 1848 is because the entire Mexican government is dead or disbanded, and it takes them that long to reform in a functioning body to sign the treaty.
Golly.
It takes them until the 2nd of February to sign, because there's just no one left. They've all fled, been killed, been captured. The government of Mexico falls in the Mexican-American War. And it falls completely.
I mean, considering what we've already talked about, it already seemed like the Mexican government was kind of shaky during this time.
They did not have a strong democracy, and they did not have a strong military. Thus, anyone who possessed a competent regiment, like Santa Anna, was pretty much capable of hijacking the military. And it is in this war, Justin, that a regiment from Illinois seizes Santa Anna's leg as a war trophy and brings it back to Springfield.
Which I'm set. We have to pick a date, and we are going to visit the leg.
Historically, Humans goes on the road.
Yeah.
Here we go again.
And then talking about important generals, because Santa Anna played a huge role, but then on the United States side, we see a lot of noteworthy generals gain battle experience here, and a lot of them went on to the Civil War, but like Zachary Taylor ended up in a career in politics and became president. But then we see generals that ended up in the Confederacy, like Stonewall Jackson.
Basically, the Mexican-American War field trains the entirety of the Confederate generalship, almost to a man.
Stonewall Jackson, Robert Lee, Longstreet, Pickett, Johnston, Armistead, Beauregard.
But there were a few future Union generals that were there, especially General Grant and Meade, Thomas, and Hooker.
Yeah, but Hooker was decommissioned 2 years into the war because he was batshit insane.
I mean,
look, they weren't all the best generals on the Union side,
but they were generals.
The Confederacy controlled West Point. The Confederacy controlled West Point, so most of the competent military was Virginian.
I mean, but they still had Grant, so let's face it. Who honestly pretty much brought the Anaconda Plan to full circle.
And also, fun fact with this, the Mexican-American War is technically responsible for the start of the Civil War, because without the Mexican-American War, without this incorporation of Texas, the issue of slavery doesn't become the hot-button issue that it does. This war pushes the idea of slavery to the forefront of American minds. It makes it the heart of American politics once again, and it effectively breaks down the the Mason-Dixon line as a compromise. It really corrodes the ability of that compromise to hold sway in America. Ultimately, it's for the better, but it does start the catalyst for this war.
I mean, we should also just highlight the fact that Texas ardently throughout its entire history, pre-Mexican, post-Mexican, and post-pre-American and into American, that topic of slavery was a hot button issue the entire time of its founding.
Even after the Civil War, as you mentioned earlier, they really didn't want the slaves to know.
Yes.
Yeah, we literally have a federal holiday.
The last 250,000 slaves in the United States were held in Texas.
Illegally.
And they were held for several months after they had been officially freed. They were held illegally by their owners.
No matter how much.
A fun fact of which, a number of those Texan owners fled to Brazil.
I forgot about that.
Slave state in the Western Hemisphere, which several years after they arrived, like I think no more than a decade, abolished slavery.
Because that was during that whole debacle where Portugal's government was overthrown and the monarchy got moved there, and then they moved back.
Yeah,
became
Brazil,
independent.
Brazil spends most of the early to mid 19th century being sort of the odd duck of both Europe and the Americas.
Well, I
Brazil's
was
a
going to
fun
say
place.
it was mirrored again, 80 years later when a bunch of a bunch of Nazis end up migrating to Brazil as a safe haven.
I thought that was Argentina.
It was
Desert.
both, but
Okay.
yes.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Although Brazil did nominally declare war and send soldiers against Germany, which Argentina did not, so more ended up there. Fun fact: the town that was founded by the Texans that fled to Brazil, they host a Confederate Day every year,
no.
where they dance and parade in costume before a giant Confederate flag. And I mean giant even by American standards.
Well, yeah, it's
Oh,
Brazil.
Thing's a
It's
billboard.
everything's amplified by 10, just more discreetly than Texas.
But yeah,
This
has been how the Republic of Texas was formed and then incorporated into the United States.
And on that tragic bombshell, I think that'll be it for us today.
tragic bombshell of Texas becoming a U.S. state.
I think I've thrown enough shade at our Texas viewers.
Hey. It also got us California, so in the end,
You
it
mean
balanced
California?
itself out.
That's true.
Cool. We got San Diego. Really? I mean, honestly, that's probably all we wanted.
But if you guys enjoyed watching today's podcast, be sure to drop a like and comment down below. Be sure to subscribe for more. And be sure to follow us on all of our social media pages because we post a lot of content all across the board. And if you guys enjoyed this, Colum, what's next on the docket? What do we have coming up here?
All right, next up, we will be seeing from our reads section, if it will let me view. There we go. From our read section next up, following the arrival of this video on the 7th, we will see La Morte de Arthur, or in English, The Death of King Arthur, followed by Gulliver's Travels. Additionally, we will have some explains videos on the importance of the Rio Grande River, discussed here as part of the catalyst for the Mexican-American War.
Yep.
And we will have a reacts for the sister city of Göbekli Tepe, which has been discovered by archaeologists, and their work is just now getting published into
mainstream media.
Publicly accessible media. Yes.
Yeah. We'll
Which
have
means
to
it's
specify.
been under review for probably 10 years.
Yeah, I was going to say...
The excavations have been going on for 4 years at this city.
Oh,
So
wow,
it's been
that's
4
fast.
Yeah, it's been 4 years between getting the excavations beginning and it coming out to the public.
But then our next big podcast that's coming up on August 22nd is the Great Emu War and the Great Leap Forward. So we're talking about man's attempt at controlling nature.
Yeah, it is our attempt to conquer nature.
There's quite a few of those. In fact, it's a
Yes.
literary theme: man versus nature.
yeah, but these are
I think nature
also
won these.
Yeah, Australia lost a war to the emus. More to come next
Spoiler
episode.
alert, man.
But thank you
Yeah,
guys
but
for
it'll be
watching,
good.
and we'll leave Aaron's links down below just like we did last time. Thank you for hopping on with us here, and
It's always fun to be here.
yeah, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Peace.